Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Wix.com, a web platform for creating your own professional website. Join over 125 million people already using Wix to tell their stories online. Go to Wix.com to create your website today.
Scandal is over. After 7 seasons, countless makeout sessions, a disturbing number of murders, and many solid arguments that Vice President is a terrible job, it's all over. Created by Shonda Rhimes, Scandal began in 2012 as sort of a procedural about Olivia Pope, a powerful Washington fixer who made problems go away.
It's handled.
But it quickly became the wildest, weirdest, and fastest-moving nighttime soap ever made about politics. And Thursday night, it all came to an end. We're wrapping up the end of an era on this episode of Pop Culture Happy Hour.
Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Bravo's Imposters. Follow Maddie, a con artist on the run, desperately trying to live an honest life, and her 3 bumbling victims who get swept up into the life of the con. The feds want to lock them up. A crime boss wants to do much worse. Every con has consequences. Imposters stars Inbar Levy, Rob Heaps, Parker Young, Marion Rendon, and features Uma Thurman. Imposters airs Thursdays at 10, 9 Central, only on Bravo.
Welcome back. We thought that in order to properly pay tribute to the end of Scandal, we'd bring together a panel of Scandal watchers. So with me in the studio is All Things Considered host Audie Cornish. Hi, Audie.
Hello there.
Also here is Sydney Madden of NPR Music. Great to have you back, Sydney.
Thanks for having me.
And, of course, from the great state of Florida, NPR's TV critic Eric Deggans, who recently wrote about Scandal's legacy for NPR.org. Hi, Eric.
Hey, what's up?
We are so happy to have all of you here. We have all seen now the end of Scandal. And before we get started, let's just say the finale has happened. 7 seasons have happened. We're going to talk about all of it. So if you're still waiting to watch the finale, maybe check this out after. But Eric, what did you think of the finale? You're our TV critic.
Is it okay for me to say that I'm glad it's over?
Absolutely.
I think more than anything, this finale was sort of evidence that it was past time for this show to be done. I mean, even given the fact that you have to accept that this is Scandal World and things happen there that would never happen anywhere else, even by the show's own sort of crazy, bonkers plotline logic, just too much happened in this episode that was just, it didn't make any sense. It just happened because we want to feel certain ways about certain characters. And, you know, when we needed to feel sad, then the attorney general was stupid enough to have, you know, drinks with the villainous vice president who would let no one stand in his way. And when we wanted to feel good about the ending, they put a portrait of Olivia in the portrait gallery. God knows why.
I don't know.
We gotta unpack this.
Yeah, we had a
Scandal.
debate. Yeah, we were having a debate about this before we started taping because Sydney and I sort of felt like maybe it meant Olivia later became president. Maybe that was how her portrait ended up in the portrait gallery. But Audie, you did not think so.
No, because unlike this show, I actually know something about politics a little bit. And I know that does not happen. That's not how you get into the National Portrait Gallery. My theory is that Olivia Pope, who famously in this series has had a long-running affair with the president, at one point the president divorces the first lady and brings Olivia in as first girlfriend. And I think that as first girlfriend / chief of staff / amazing campaign manager, that is how she earned her spot in the National Portrait Gallery. Really, she earned her spot because Shonda Rhimes is like, let's get our lives and put that in there.
Yeah.
I want to have a hopeful shot at the end of a little girl looking up at a portrait. The shame of it is we actually do have that right now in Michelle Obama, okay? So little girls actually are looking up at a portrait. They didn't need first girlfriend to make that vision happen.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with being first girlfriend, but first girlfriend who killed a lot of people.
Rigged an election.
Rigged the election. And so it's an interesting version of
Quibbles.
Yeah. Their definition of a white hat is something that is quite unique to Shondaland and the Scandalverse, shall we say.
Because they have a long history of setting up Olivia and her team as white hats, which then they kind of wandered away from, and they seem to admit that once they all became personnel of the secret spy organization known as B613, that they were maybe less white hatty, sort of. What did you think otherwise, Audie, about the way they brought this in for a landing?
I think the less said about the finale, the better. I think all of the show's worst impulses were combined into 1 hour, and I think a lot of really great television does not end in the best finale. Like, I don't think that's a good measure of the show. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, at the end of the day, Scandal is like, it's not the West Wing, right? It's not concerned with like policy, legislating, voters. It's a very claustrophobic play of players, just a handful of people. And it was mostly interested in the idea of like, how are you spiritually, morally diminished in the pursuit of power? And the whole language of the show, the patois of the show was like talking about that. Your white hat, your black hat, your gladiator, your standing in the sun. It just was vague language about being good or evil or morally ambiguous. And I think they held on to that for better or worse till the end.
What I used to say about it was I found it sort of bad in many ways, but also incredibly compelling. That it didn't really make any sense, and it was really corny sometimes. And sometimes most of the time, it utterly lost control of everything it was trying to do and would fly off the rails regularly. And yet I found it a lot of fun to watch. The reason why I sort of in my memory plan to kind of chop off that finale and imagine that it's a fantasy, someone's fantasy.
It was all a dream.
The finale is a fantasy.
Right. Oh, okay.
All seven.
Because the whole show seemed to be about the consequences of this endless pursuit of power. And the problem with the finale is it's like, but in the end, it's fine, and you can go make jelly in Vermont and have sex. By the way, that means literally go make jelly in Vermont. That's not a euphemism. You can go up to Vermont with your boo.
That's not some weird millennial
make
sort of Instagram-y thing that you came up with there. That's not that?
Right.
No.
Inappropriate. This is inappropriate.
No.
Right off in a motorcade.
No. Sydney, what did you think of the finale? And what is your relationship with Scandal like generally?
My relationship with Scandal is tumultuous, I'll say. It's kind of hot and heavy and then super cold sometimes. I just spent whole seasons just skipping it and then just been able to binge on Netflix and get right, like, without missing a beat. I remember we talked about that before the show. I like a lot of the points that you made, Audie, about how the common thread throughout the show is just the pursuit of power and how self-serving it is. And one thing that always irked me when these huge monologues in the Oval Office or wherever were going on is they always would paint it as if they're doing what's good for the country and for the American people, even though they know better than the American people, and they're doing things that obviously American people would not approve of. Even though I think the finale kind of went out with a whimper, one thing I did like that they tied a nice bow around was the fact that they admitted that they were self-serving. Olivia was like, no, we actually do need to blow up B613. We need to hope that the next generation does better than we do. Like, this is the only way to make it right. Of course, Papa Pope, Rowan, he comes in and saves the day in like the most maniacal way in the end, but whatever. I like that in the very end, Olivia was really trying to do something right, even if it didn't turn out that way, even if she did get what she wanted. The fact that she was willing to actually go to jail for her sins,
that's
as
fair.
She says, that was the one noble thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Audie, as somebody who's covered Washington for a while, I bet you've seen that a few times in real life, though. Don't people do that? Don't they convince themselves?
It is a feature, not a bug, of working in Washington and wanting to be in the White House. I think even the best administrations that people look back on fondly, like, have that element in there. And I was thinking about how Washington-based shows, how the perspective has changed on them in the Trump administration, right? Like how when Trump came to power, people were like, Veep, it's practically a documentary, or like House of Cards, it's not silly enough. Like all of a sudden these shows, there was sort of a different lens we had on them. And with Scandal, the only thing I think they kind of got right is the idea that, like, you can walk away from that pursuit diminished.
Yeah.
And if you just look at the last couple of months, there's been a lot of people who left this White House and they're not better for it. You know, let us put that, like, the public view of them has changed.
I think that's true.
I'm not saying any of these people murdered anyone. No. I'm not saying any one of them had affairs or sex in the Oval Office. I just want to make that clear.
No. Speaking of the Oval Office and having affairs, one thing that I do want to address is that the show was very invested always in Olivia and her relationship with Fitz, who used to be the president.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Seriously.
So is everyone a Fitz hater?
Yeah.
Who cares about Fitz? Why is there still Fitz? Fitz is not the president
You can't take any
anymore.
man seriously named Fitz.
Go away,
I have this theory.
Fitz.
I have this theory about Shonda Rhimes shows. Really, it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of a theory too, is that she always finds like a boring white person to kind of put in the middle of the story.
As an anchor.
And when I saw, like Grey's Anatomy,
Who is it on Grey's?
private practice. Well, for me, for a while, it was Grey.
Oh my
Yeah, that's what I'm
gosh.
saying. That's what I
This
said. I
is
said
sacrilege to me, but continue.
I know. I know.
intrigued.
See, if I were to name two things that kind of ruined Scandal for me, it's constantly going back to Fitz and it's B613. Those two things.
B613
were just,
swallowed this program
know,
whole.
Yeah.
I went back to the beginning and watched some of the very first ones, and it was so different. It was
a procedural.
It really was a procedural. It was, I mean, it always had arcs, right? It was always a little bit longer than like one case at a time. But it really was about Olivia running this office where they went around in D.C. and they solved problems for people. I sort of miss the show that would have been if that show had run for longer, because they pretty quickly turned it over to the crazier side of having people killed. And
Do you think this is what happened with the X-Files? That was the
kind of.
comparison I had in my mind, that it starts out one thing and after a while the B plot becomes everything.
Well, there are a lot of shows that balance like a story of the week and the underlying mythology, right? And definitely X-Files is one of the ones that's been applied to. Also Buffy is one. But at the beginning there was at least a balance. By the last several seasons, they barely had clients.
They didn't do
like
cases.
I don't know.
They had
By the time
I don't know
Quinn took over,
Yeah.
I guess it was Pope and Associates. By the time she took it over, there was like nothing for her to do.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, did they still have clients? Did she still do this job? What was her job? What was her company's job? Because I think Eric is exactly right that once B613, which is this sort of like shadow spy, monstrous, very similar to the other organization on Alias that was kind of the same way, had one. By that point, once that kind of swallows the whole show, I didn't care.
What's interesting to me to hear you guys talk about how they balanced procedural with overarching mythology. Like, for so long on television, when you look at the more traditional network, CBS, it's still like that. That's exactly the old school formula of television is, you have a few storylines that kind of arc over and particularly sort of personal things, but, it's a case of the week, NCIS and all of its progenitors and Criminal Minds and SWAT and all of those shows are like that. And it's just interesting that we're now in this TV moment where, thanks to streaming and thanks to some cable channels, so much of what they do is not that anymore. One of the things I tried to talk about in my Scandal piece was how sort of television changed around Scandal and kind of made it seem obsolete. And I think that's one of the things that kind of changed around Scandal that made it seem even hokier and crazier and kind of, less attractive than it used to be, because, we shifted from enjoying melodrama to wanting more authentic stuff in drama. And we also shifted from, the way this show used to tell stories to something more complex and deeper.
Eric, I want to challenge that. Here's why you're wrong, I think, because